Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you very much for joining us to learn about underrated club metrics for 2021. I guess I'm officially going to be your host today. My name is Trevor Kuglin. I am the VP of Marketing with Jonas Club Software, and I've got some of the best and brightest joining me on the line today. I'll get to some introductions here in just a minute, but just a little bit of housekeeping first. Actually, I'll do the introductions first. So we've got Derek Johnson, partner at GGA Partners, Mark Darling, product manager with MetricsFirst, and Martin Tankov, senior manager at GGA Partners. Martin, I apologize if I butchered your last name again, but I don't seem to be able to get it right usually.
That was perfect.
A little bit of housekeeping to get us started here, folks. All of your lines are on mute to start with during the presentation today. If you do have any questions, comments, anything happening, if we sound weird, if our audio is messed up, by all means, use the chat window and submit your questions through the questions panel or the chat window, whichever you can reach fastest throughout the presentation today. And we will happily circle back around on those questions and dive into them during our Q&A at the end of the session today. A little bit about Jonas Club Software before we get in, and then I'll let Derek kind of introduce GGA Partners. So for those of you on the line who are either Jonas Club Software clients or have worked with us in the past, obviously, thank you. For those of you who might not be familiar with us, we are a multifaceted club software company. We offer software and technology solutions for all different areas of the club, but really in three main brackets: back office, website and mobile solutions, and value-added benefits. And one of those value-added benefits solutions we're going to be talking about today in the form of MetricsFirst, where you can kind of source some information that we'll be speaking about. As a whole, Jonas Club Software, we kind of take this philosophy when we look at the clubs that really a club is like a number of small businesses all operating under one umbrella and really working to deliver a unified service experience. So we try to be the technology company that offers you solutions for all of these different areas. So everything from your back office, your accounting systems, to fitness facilities, your golf course, your food and beverage department, valet, tennis courts, you name it, we try and service those areas with our technology solutions. So that's a little bit about Jonas Club Software and what we do and why we do it and how we look at it. I will invite Derek here to tell you a little bit about GGA Partners.
Thanks, Trevor, and hello, everyone. As many of you may know, GGA Partners, an international management consulting firm and a trusted advisor to many of the world's most successful private clubs, golf courses, resorts, and residential communities. We help our clients from our 4 offices, one in Phoenix, one in Bluffton, one in Toronto, and the other one in Dublin, Ireland. We help with strategy and operations, governance consulting, branding and communications, executive search, performance monitoring, and we also have a transaction advisory practice where we help with both buy-side and sell-side transaction support. But all of those services are essentially informed by our research and data analytics services. So I guess really quickly, a little bit about my role and background. I lead the design and development of our strategic solutions, and I direct GGA's research and analytics services globally. I spent just about the last 20 years now pulling apart and putting back together the financials and operations of hundreds of different private clubs and hospitality-related businesses around the world, initially for clients of Arthur Andersen and then Deloitte, and then as part of a startup software company in the club space before joining GGA 12 years ago. And really quickly, I'll introduce my colleague, Martin Tankov, as well. He's responsible for managing large-scale client assignments on behalf of GGA, as well as our research and analytics services. So I'd say Martin's a brilliant analyst and business mind. He's been with GGA for a number of years now. Over his tenure, he's helped over 100 clients analyze current circumstances, project future outcomes, and ultimately inform really key strategic decisions. So we're really looking forward to discussing what we see as underrated metrics and analytics for clubs in 2021 and beyond. But before we do, we thought it'd be helpful for Mark to walk everyone through MetricsFirst, just to give you a sense for the amount of data that's available to clubs, especially if they're strategic and intentional in the setup and configuration of their operating systems. Ultimately, accessible and accurate data is a key foundational element for successful private club analytics programs. So with that, kick it over to you, Mark, to walk everybody through MetricsFirst.
Hi, everybody. Thanks, Derek. Yeah, that's great. So yeah, like we said, we're going to be talking about underrated metrics today, and a great place in the Jonas ecosystem to get some of those metrics, or at least the data for those metrics, is MetricsFirst. MetricsFirst is a Jonas subsidiary, and with that, we integrate very tightly with Jonas systems. So whether it's your Jonas Club Management or Jonas Encore system, we get the majority of our data from there. But we do also integrate with a few other vendors as well for bookings and reservations. And so we just wanted to spend a couple of quick minutes here just to show you a couple of other really popular dashboards in the system before we dive into some of those underrated metrics. So on that note here, I'm just going to navigate on the left side. You can see here right now we have up a variety of membership-focused dashboards, but I'm going to scroll down, and the first dashboard we'll look at is under bookings and reservations. But you can see a variety of membership dashboards there, and like I said, we'll talk about bookings and reservations. And you can see a variety of booking-related dashboards. The one I'll talk about is tee times. And you can see in this first report here, we have rounds by month. And as I mouse over, you can see the count for each month there. And if we scroll down, we can see rounds by day of the week. And over to the right, rounds by hour. And one of the cool things you can do with these reports, if I scroll back up here, and just click on a month, let's say April, it will further filter these reports. And now I can see my rounds by day of the week for specifically for last month. And same thing for the tee times by hour. And I'll further filter that by clicking on Saturday. And now I'm looking at all my Saturdays in April. And then you could further filter in the top left there by membership type, or for some of you, might be by member status. I can select a category there, and it will refresh the entire dashboard specifically by that category. Let's say your main membership category, or by guests, things like that. And so we'll touch a little bit on food and beverage, a very popular dashboard we like to call menu analysis. If I scroll down here, you'll see we focus on your sales categories and your sales items. And so F&B managers or directors really like to come here to see what's doing well versus what isn't. I just clicked on grill room dinner, and now I can see my top items in that category. I can reverse sort. I can see my bottom items as well. And if I sort again, I'm back to my top. So we could see the grilled ribeye was at the top. But we ran some specials last month, and now we want to take a look at, specifically what did well in the month of April. And you can see now the halibut is at the top, and the grilled ribeye moved down to the third spot there. And you could take it a step further. If I click on grilled ribeye, it will further filter a couple of reports down below where I can see what members purchased that item and what the sales trend for that item was over the last few years. So again, very popular dashboard for the F&B team. We'll just change gears a little bit here. Under very similar to food and beverage, I'm going to jump and show you another dashboard. Under membership, there's a variety of dashboards here, things like demographics, top spenders, but the one I want to touch on is called sales items. And like I said, very similar to what we just saw with the F&B. This will allow you to look at your sales categories and items, but this one goes club-wide. And so you could see, if I scroll down, we start to get into categories, dues, rackets, there's golf there as well. And so if I'm a department manager, I can come in here and find this location report. You might know this as your sales area in Jonas, and click on the sales area appropriate to me. So I clicked on golf. We'll give it a sec to refresh. And as I scroll down here, now I can see my top, my golf categories. I'll select the category, and I can see my top selling items in that category as well. You can reverse sort to see the bottom. And just like we did with F&B, we can click on an item to see the members who've purchased it, the sales trend for those items over the years. And there I just clicked on fitness. Now it's refreshed the categories and items specifically to the fitness sales area. And so, like I said, you can do the same analysis we just saw. So very powerful, very popular. And so with that, Trevor, if you can go to the next slide for us. That's all I want to show you for today. I'd like to turn it over to Derek at GGA.
Yeah, thanks, Mark. And I mean, I'd say, every time we onboard a new client, one of the first steps is to learn as much as we possibly can about that club or that club's business. And any clients that are using MetricsFirst, one of the impactful things from our perspective is that it's cloud-based, so we can access it remotely from anywhere. And it provides a fantastic foundational layer of data and great dashboards just to begin that analysis. Over the past few years, we've been actively involved in ongoing discussions and efforts in the club industry on, okay, so what are the most important metrics for private clubs? How should clubs best prepare for and use data analytics, including supporting the work of a special CMA task force that was focused on universal KPIs for the club industry. What we thought would be helpful for club leaders right now, given the recent impacts of the pandemic, and at this stage in the evolution of club analytics, if you will, would be a quick, hopefully thought-provoking run-through of how we've been approaching analytics with our clients and what we see as underrated yet incredibly important metrics for private clubs, particularly as it relates to strategizing and taking action this year and beyond. When you boil it right down to the key driver or primary metrics that we believe are critical to clubs, no surprise. I mean, it's all about the member, everywhere from social interactions to behavioral patterns. Ultimately, membership is the key driver of private club success and sustainability. So it's one thing to track how you're performing with respect to membership, which is what tracking changes in full membership equivalents over time, or membership counts, or sales and resignations, et cetera, can help with. It's another, arguably as important, if not more important, from our perspective, to focus on metrics and analytics that can help inform specific action. So especially as it pertains to your members, whether it be for designing and setting specific member policies, or tweaking and adjusting, or setting booking restrictions, or creating specials or promotions, or devising tactics that ultimately enhance your sales and your retention trajectories. Ultimately, when you focus on patterns in membership data and changes in key membership metrics, it's even more important. And Trevor, if you don't mind just going to the next slide there. So really interestingly, when you think about changes, I mean, now more than ever before, we've all seen relatively dramatic and rapid changes with respect to membership demand. So since the onset of the pandemic, membership size and demand for different key categories have increased for almost every type of club on average, with almost half of all clubs reporting an increase in full membership equivalents since March 2020, which is staggering, right? And the median increase in full membership equivalents that's been reported is actually 10%, which is a huge change year over year. So you can see an example on the next slide here that actually demonstrates the significant shift in new versus resigned members that one club has experienced in comparison to prior year. So 2021 new members is off the charts almost. And this type of growth is fantastic for the industry. It definitely brings with it a whole new set of challenges, which in many cases have thrown club leaders headlong into data analytics, ready or not to a degree. I'd say one of the more straightforward focal points for 2020 and 2021 are shown on just the next slide here. And it's, when you think about analytics, it really involves member-specific utilization and spending metrics. That's been a key focal point for a lot of clubs. It's been incredibly helpful as clubs have wrestled with uncommon surges or retractions in activity across the various aspects of their business. So on the next slide, what you can actually see is it's pretty incredible to see in a visual example of how member utilization has been impacted by the pandemic. So this is a live club, and you can see their history of F&B covers over time for the last 12 months. It's quite astonishing and certainly different from their typical historic patterns. So when you think about readily available metrics on the next slide, it's what we're seeing is that metrics are becoming more and more readily available at every level of a club's organization, and it's really helping to support and inform really quick forecasting and decision making, ultimately by providing important context. So if you think about how simple yet incredibly helpful it is for your team to know, just as a really simple example, what the average number of club visits has been per membership over the last 12 months, as they're trying to quickly determine what type of surge in activity they should expect and ultimately plan for in the next month or two, as a result of, say, and what a lot of clubs have actually experienced, what might be the result of 30 or 40 new memberships that the club's just sold and is onboarding. And obviously that's even better when you can break that down by key functional area and outlet. It helps incredibly so with the concept and strategy around restrictions and the like, but also around staffing. So readily available metrics are really important and have been really important through the pandemic, which is great. I mean, ultimately, we think the pandemic's catapulting analytics to the forefront, if you will. We've witnessed the impacts really push forward, essentially as club leaders race to answer really important questions. And I think when the dust settles from the pandemic, I think the nice part is we really believe that everybody will have seen a leap forward in the industry from the analytics perspective. It's data analytics has definitely long been a daunting topic for club leaders, with the enormous amount of data that's become available to them, and also the seemingly endless possibilities of metrics and analysis. For clubs to get started with analytics, we've always found it really helpful to focus their team on specific questions. So find the answers to specific questions that are intended to support and inform a specific strategic decision or operational decision, and ultimately what type of action should be taken. And with the onslaught of questions that essentially demanded answers this past year, we really do think the power and the value of analytics has been brought more clearly into focus, if you will. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Martin to briefly take you through a few important questions and the resulting impactful metrics that we really encourage everybody to focus on in 2021 and beyond. So with that, over to you, Martin.
Yeah, perfect. Thanks, Derek. So yeah, as Derek mentioned, some of the metrics we'll be covering today really seek to answer, kind of two questions. What are the fundamental characteristics of your membership, and how, has it changed or is it changing? And also about how do members, use and derive value from your club. And when you can begin to answer these questions in, some capacity, and hopefully an increasingly detailed capacity, you're pretty well equipped to make, good strategic and operational decisions going forward as, the landscape changes. So Trev, I'll just have you switch the slides here. So a really underappreciated or underrated metric, or almost a set of data points, pertains to membership lifecycle. And these metrics here, so age at join, age at resignation, life cycle, meaning how long does a member stay a member when they join, and the tenure of current members. They're very powerful metrics as standalone kind of data points, but they're also very powerful to see the change over time. And so these metrics, I almost describe them as almost like the metadata of your membership. It's almost akin to a demographer when they look at stats like birth rate, mortality, life expectancy, things like that of a country. They all become more relevant when you're comparing them, from your country to another country, or how they're changing over time. And these are all very simple, data points that everybody has, embedded somewhere in their membership database, hopefully, I mean, some more they're not, but you can really derive these from the join date, the birth date, things like that. And over time, these become increasingly powerful for some of the analysis you can do. And this little graphic underneath is just sort of highlighting, members tend to really focus on, or sorry, clubs rather tend to focus on their current members. But often, when members resign, their data is, not kept well or not incorporated into analysis. But some of that past data of resigned members is actually really important and valuable to include in kind of that overall analysis of a life cycle of a member. And with that data, you can start to answer some really interesting questions and start to predict certain things. And most importantly, or a really important question is, how long will a member who joins today stay a member, based on a number of characteristics that you might be able to discern by looking at past members who have joined and resigned. So things like the category they belong to, how old are they when they join? Is someone who joins at 25 going to stay a member as long as someone who joins at 55? I mean, there's certain characteristics that you can see a club exhibit in that pattern of joining and resigning. And different clubs have different sort of characteristics of when members join and resign. So for example, a kind of annual membership type club, you probably wouldn't see much difference between the profile of joining members versus resigning members. It's sort of a one-year thing. There's no initiation fee. There's no stake up front. Whereas, some long kind of storied clubs with a high initiation fee, you really see that life cycle of members kind of aging through the club, where they join young, resign later. And these different patterns can be really important for strategic decision making. And this is just one example output. Of course, you can do many different types that we wouldn't have time to cover today, nearly enough time rather. But this is showing the demo club here in MetricsFirst, pulling basically the age distribution of new members who have joined since, in this case, back even to the 70s, showing through like a box and whisker plot, which is the bottom of the box is the 25th percentile and the top is the 75th percentile. And you can see, I mean, it looks similar each year and it kind of bounces around, but even in the early 2000s, you can see the average age, or the median age rather, kind of creep up from mid to high 30s up to almost 45 in the span of like 15-ish years. So that's a pretty big jump. And even on a bigger scale, you can see kind of in the 2000s, those outlier figures of members joining, at a much later age into their, 60s and even 70s. So over time, these are really important kind of insights to catch, and to be able to filter these type of graphs for different categories and so forth can be very important for a number of use cases, setting pricing, understanding, if I shift an intermediate member into a full member, how do I price that? Well, if I know how long they're going to stay and I can predict that with some accuracy, it really advises the decision making there. And Trev, I'll just have you flip it. Yep. So another important metric is, again, it's one of those metrics that it can be used in many variety of ways. And so it's club visits. And it's rather new in the sense that, before some of these tools and technology was available, it may have been more difficult to get at visits. Clubs have maybe historically had rounds and covers kind of separately, but being able to basically align each member's visit to understand what exactly are they doing at the club when they go there. Are they golfing and then eating after, or doing all the activities that they might do there, kind of adding a descriptive layer to that and what that looks like, and breaking it down in a number of ways. And maybe golf clubs have the luxury of a round is probably a visit, but many other clubs, city clubs, sports clubs, there's many things they could encompass in one visit. And some clubs are even looking at now like how long they're spending at the club, from check-in to check-out at the gate, things like that. But a way I thought I'd visualize it here just for this audience is the distribution of visits. And Trev, do you mind just rewinding one just for a second here? One slide back. Thanks, yeah. And that's just, so this is for a club, basically showing the distribution of all their visits from least to highest by member. And this is a typical kind of shape. You see that exponential curve, and it's because, you know, a lot of the visits are actually coming from like a few amount of members. Now you can flip it, Trevor. But that leads into kind of a key metric that we like to look at when we work with clubs, and it's total spend per club visit for each member. And it's essentially showing, you know, the cost that for the member for each visit of the club. And you can see how it's kind of inverted in the sense that the people who are using the club the most are getting the best value, right? So it's total spend, including dues and everything. And so it's really interesting to be able to look at that metric for different membership categories, for example, to understand the value they're getting out of their membership for their price. And just a little insight here we thought we'd throw in is it can even be, you know, very strategic in that some clubs have different looking curves when you look at the total spend per visit. So the one on the left is a club that, you know, for example, is maybe the members are more price sensitive. So, you know, nearly everyone's getting a pretty good value. Every club always has members that are, you know, that on the left tail there who, you know, they just didn't use the club that year, medical leave, etc. But what we find is there's often a lot of clubs, especially on the higher end, like destination kind of lifestyle clubs, where a really big percentage of the members is getting what appears to be kind of not great value on a per visit perspective, or what you think when you look at it that way. But the reality is, you know, it gives you a little insight into what the club is really selling, and it's that it's a lifestyle product. It goes beyond the tangible elements of the club and the facilities. You're selling an experience, a lifestyle. And so that in itself is a very kind of strategic point to know about your club and to know what it is you're really trying to achieve for the member experience. And Trev, you could flip to the next one here. And this is just a more, again, using club visits, but in this case, in a more operationally focused way. So this chart here is just showing the distribution of days since the last visit by different membership categories. So showing, you know, how long has it been since someone has visited the club. And this is, again, real data from the demo account. So it's actually really relevant in the sense that you can see some of the older categories, you know, everyone's median is kind of bouncing around a similar band, but at the higher end, the categories that are exhibiting, you know, long durations of time where members haven't visited is coming from the older categories. And you can see even the social category, which is probably in this case like a dining membership, is way up there because dining was, you know, probably closed for quite some time as a result of COVID. So this is just an example of how you can take something seemingly simple like club visits and really make it a powerful story for kind of what's going on at the club and give you some actionable insights. So members at risk, it's an important kind of theme. And to do this in MetricsFirst, again, there's a module that sort of does it for you. But again, as Trevor mentioned, this is something you can do, you know, in any club if you just kind of slice up the data that you have. This particular model uses age, club visits, change in club visits, discretional spending, and change in discretional spending to track, you know, members who may potentially be at risk of resigning. And whenever a member is in the bottom percentiles, I believe it's 15% for this model, in each of those categories, it assigns, you know, risk score. So even if a member is using the club very often and, you know, they're active, but they're at the kind of highest end of the age bracket, they're just inevitably kind of at risk of resigning in the coming years, just of aging out of the club. And it's really important here to note that the change in visits and spending is important. You know, a member may traditionally just not use the club that often, and that's fine. They're content with that. but noting, a change in their behavior or activity can be really important and maybe signaling a potential resignation. And it's important to note, these are just selected metrics that we've seen perform strongly, but kind of the future of this is actually getting the data to sort of predict this for you and pick up on different signals that you may not even think to be relevant, but actually are good predictors of resignations. Social interactions is one that it would take some work to do independently without a kind of technology or tool to gather it for you, but it is also becoming an increasingly important metric. And basically what social interactions are in this context, or how we define it, is the number of other members a member has bookings with or interacts with. The number of people that a member typically interacts with through tea times and bookings information. And it really shows kind of the size of the network of that member. And it's interesting to see, especially over time, how that grows. And that's a very actionable kind of item as well for a manager if they're looking at, the newest members, let's say that joined in the past year or two. How are they engaging with the other members? Are they able to make friends and find a tea time? How is their kind of network growing within the club? And you can take action there to, help them out. Hey, are you able to, get a tea time with who you like, or et cetera? Maybe invite them to some events that would help them kind of meet and socialize with other members. And we'll just move along quickly here. Trevor, I know we're bumping up the 30-minute time. And really the last element is cohort analysis. And you'll notice a lot of these aren't specific metrics per se, but it's a way of viewing the data. And we find that a lot of clubs in our experience aren't kind of leveraging their membership system to the best of their ability for classifying different members. So for things like membership type, membership status, there are, opportunities to classify members in very discernible ways that may not be built into the club's, basically like their payment and billing system. So you might have some stock kind of membership categories, and you can do cohorts by age and things like that. But there might be other elements of, say residents versus non-residents, or, legacy members, people who were kids of former members, things like that, that are very distinctive and may actually impact the way they use the club. And there's an opportunity usually to sort of categorize members in that way and do different analysis, even simple as spending in different outlets, and just understand how different cohorts are using the club, and basically using that to predict future activity. If you see that, all the young members tend to be using this specific outlet, or, just using the club in a certain way, kind of tells you a story for, what's to come or the changing landscape at your club.
Excellent. Thanks very much, Martin. So from a marketer's perspective, this is one that I really wanted to hit on, because generational mix is really important when you are thinking about how to market to prospective members, as well as how to communicate with your existing members. And it's one of the things that I think it's often overlooked. But if you have the ability at your club to understand your generational mix, then you've got a lot more power at your fingertips than maybe you realize. And in the current climate that we're seeing in the club industry, where, if you've had a golf course over the course of the last year, you've probably seen some pretty positive changes in membership interest, and maybe you're onboarding new members into your club. I talked to a membership director from Southwest Florida recently, and she said to me that, for the first time ever, she is actually selling memberships to young professionals and young families. The way she put it to me was she's selling memberships to, folks like yourself. And typically in Southwest Florida, in Naples, it's been a pretty standard demographic there. They know what to expect. Usually retirees coming down, buying a home, living on property. And those are really the types of club communities that flourish in that area. But this new dynamic of membership is starting to change that. And there really are considerations that need to be made. things like club programming, new member onboarding, and overall member communication. These are all driven by demographic changes because different demographics do like to be communicated with in different ways, and they have different interests. So from my perspective, looking at a dashboard like this, looking at the actual life cycle and the generational breakdown at my club, this is information that as a marketer, I would love to have. And this is not something that I can easily get for my existing clients or my prospective clients from a Jonas perspective. And, you know, I've been with Jonas for 15 years, 16 years almost. And at no point have I been able to get information like this. But this would absolutely help to drive my marketing programs. So if your club is considering marketing programs and what you're doing, there's some key things that you might be able to take away if you really have a good understanding of your generational mix. So first off, it's just an overall good understanding of your club's most important demographic. There's probably nothing that ties your members closer together than the demo age that they belong to. You can ensure your communication strategies are designed to really kind of appeal to the most dominant segments. And you can also see which segment of your membership is either driving change or the lack of change. And by this, I really mean, you know, understanding who's kind of helping you make the decisions for the future of your club. One of the things that I quite often I talk about with people is this concept of, you know, full lifetime value of membership. And I think what I hear a lot is that clubs get into the habit of really making sure that they appease their long-time members. And there's no doubt that that's an important thing to do, right? You owe them the loyalty that they've shown you. But at the same time, if you look at it very clinically, the full lifetime value of membership is actually at its peak when a member joins day one. Not only do they have years ahead of them of spending money at your club, they also have a large social network that may result in future memberships coming through the front doors, whereas your longer term memberships have probably exhausted those social connections. So, you know, in my opinion, clubs are at kind of this interesting phase where, you know, they're adopting a lot of younger members. You still have people that have been at the club for 20 or 30 years, and you want to respect their wishes. But at the same time, for the future health of your business, you have to be paying attention to what some of these younger members are saying and making some strategic decisions based off of it. I mean, you know, I think a lot of clubs in the next 12 to 24 months are going to be faced with the decision, you know, do we resurface, you know, the bocce courts, or do we invest in a new slide and diving board for the pool and upgrade those facilities? Because we really are at a tipping point where we need to start appealing to a different type of demographic. The other thing that this can really fuel is your communication strategy. And I think this one's really important because you need to know whether or not you're communicating with your members on their terms. And nothing is more indicative of that than the generational mix at your club. We all know that Gen Z and millennials communicate much differently than Gen Xers and boomers and beyond. So making sure that you're investing in the types of communication plans that you need to, you're using the right tools, you're going to the social networks that they utilize. You know, big decision between printed newsletter or going 100% digital in a lot of clubs these days. So all things that can really kind of fuel future decisions for how you communicate with your members. And then looking at new tools as well, right? Mobile app, push notifications, text messaging, things like this to really start to communicate with people on their own terms are becoming more and more important. But none of this is any good unless you've actually got the data in your system. So I want to bring Martin back in here for a second to really talk about some of the barriers to that and some of the things to keep in mind to kind of finish up our presentation for today.
Yeah, perfect. Thanks, Trevor. So inevitably, you know, I'm sure there's a lot of managers that are watching, and you know, they probably see this firsthand that, you know, some of the activities that take place at the club for dining, for bookings, the way the data is stored is sometimes ambiguous, and that if someone were to do an analysis on it afterwards, what the data shows may not be perfectly indicative of what happened. As far as like the bookings and the covers and so forth. And so there's just a simple diagram here of showing how memberships are typically sort of stored and maybe viewed, and that there's usually a primary member with the 1, 2, 3 there for that membership number. And they have, you know, a spouse and then maybe some dependents who, if it's a family membership, you know, they might have been stored in the system as members, but, you know, maybe two of the kids, don't even live in the same province or state anymore because they're away for university and so forth. Other examples are for guests. Oftentimes clubs will have members bring guests who are basically unknown, and it's not known if it's the same guests over and over, or if it's different people. And same with dining reservations, or covers themselves. It might be a group of 4, but the one member is, paying, or it's going on their chit. So it's just recorded as spending for that member, even though, there was obviously other people who engaged in that activity at the club. And so it's just important to, have an understanding of this and know that, these are the barriers, and the more we can improve kind of as an industry, and it starts with really the club level storing that data properly, and balancing, not being intrusive, of course, with the members and keeping it as seamless of an experience as you can, but making sure that the data being recorded and stored is actually reflective. And
Martin, if I could chime in there for a second on that point. A typical thing that I see in working with clients at MetricsFirst is, like Martin said, the storing of the data. A common example is tracking resigned members. So if monitoring that information is important to you, it's important to obviously track it cleanly. And what I often see is clubs will have a category or status to track the resigned members, but the problem they sometimes run into is in that same status is often old employee accounts or old reciprocal accounts or other administrative related accounts for, let's say, banquets and things like that. So it's really a good practice to try and figure out what are the things that are important to you that you'd like to track, and ensure that data or that information is being inputted into whatever system you're using appropriately. And so if you're a MetricsFirst client or a Jonas client, you can always reach out to someone like myself or the Jonas team for advice on how to track or input that data into your system so that you can get reports on it properly.
Thanks very much, guys. Yeah, and I think with that said, we've gone a little bit over time here, so I want to thank everybody on the line for sticking with us. We do have some good questions that I'd like us to address before we wrap up. But for anyone who's interested in getting in touch with us, you can find all of our information and get in touch with us through our company websites, either ggapartners.com or jonasclub.com. And thank you to those of you that have been submitting questions throughout the presentation. I do want to be respectful of everyone's time, so we'll just answer a few, but we've got some really good ones here. And Mark, the reason I kind of jumped in there is because the very first question I wanted to address was, from Elizabeth asking, how do you recommend tracking usage for multi-use sports like dining, sailing, etc.? So I think really what Elizabeth's asking there is when you've got multiple facilities where you want to track your utilization, are there any best practices there?
Yeah, so ideally, if you have some sort of reservation system, you want to try your best to input it there. What we've seen over the pandemic at Jonas is that clubs are utilizing whatever module they can to track those reservations. So they're using their event registrations to track, monitor pool reservations or pool bookings. So as much as you can, you want to try and get that into a digital form somehow, and avoiding pen and paper where possible. So that, I would say starting with that, but more specifically, if you reach out to me or I can reach out to you after the session, we can talk about what systems you have in place and we can dive a little deeper on how best to track some of those.
Excellent. And I guess kind of a follow-on to that was another question we got from Brett, saying that, he's talking about visits at the club. So for most clubs, the number of visits is calculated on a purchase, so a meal, a round of golf. And he's asking what tools Jonas has to capture those members who are using fitness or something like that, but aren't actually doing it through a proper booking engine where there's a purchase or anything like that. So, Brett, just, one of the things that we do is, or one of the things we offer is an application called activity tracking that was designed specifically for areas of your club like that don't have traditional reservation systems in place. Activity tracking is the type of thing where you can actually have your members scan a key card, a virtual key card on their mobile app. They can punch in their code. It gets them access to these areas of the facilities, and then you've got full accounting of where members have been and when. This is one of the things that we were encouraging this past year as well. For any clubs that were looking to do more, I guess, kind of history tracking of who was on site in case of any type of COVID outbreaks. We basically said for anywhere that you're not taking reservations, if you can be tracking who's coming and going in those areas, then you can at least report on it, and you have a good accounting of who's been on site and when. But by all means, we can follow up after the session as well and talk a little bit more. For the guys at GGA, there's a good question here from Trevor Noonan. So he's asking, do you have any metrics or any insight on city and dining clubs in Canada or Ontario, or maybe just in general, and what types of experiences they've had over the course of the last year? And I think this is kind of hitting on the fact that obviously we've seen some positivity and some growth in the sector with clubs that have outdoor recreation facilities, like especially golf courses. But a lot of city and dining clubs don't have those types of facilities. So do you guys have any insight in terms of what you've been seeing, whether it's in writing or it's just anecdotally?
Yeah, sure, Trevor. And Trevor, good question. The research that we've done with clubs across North America, so Canadian clubs and US clubs, and what's been really interesting through the pandemic, obviously, is that everything's kind of based on jurisdiction. So the rules and the restrictions that are in place by state, by province, by jurisdiction, if you will, have seemed to have been different in a lot of cases. In Canada, where Trevor, I know you're based, from province to province, the restrictions right now are very different. But all of the research that we've been collecting, I mentioned that previously, a lot of the research we've done, there's a median 10% growth in actual full member equivalents across all private clubs. That's across every type of private club. Unfortunately, for the city clubs and the dining clubs, we haven't seen that same growth. We haven't seen as big of a retraction in membership and full membership equivalents as we might have actually expected, knowing that they were some of the hardest hit from a utilization perspective, a spending perspective, because of the restrictions that were in place for indoor events and dining and activities. But yeah, unfortunately, city clubs, dining clubs have not seen that exponential or very significant, I should say, growth in membership that a lot of the other club types have. And that's certainly challenging, but I think encouraging is that we haven't seen the attrition that we were expecting in that space. And I think one of the really fantastic things that we saw is everybody adapted really quickly. The whole concept of takeout food and takeout beverage really helped with that. And it's funny, it certainly helped clubs from a P&L perspective to be able to offer that type of a service. But I think one of the most impactful ways that helped was to keep the members connected with their clubs. And we've seen that in relatively limited attrition. Unfortunately, just there hasn't been that same growth. But who knows? What'll be interesting to see is as things open back up and continue to really open back up, if there might be some pent up demand there for the city and dining clubs in the months and years ahead.
Got to unmute myself first. Thanks very much, Derek, for the input on that. All right, folks, the last question we got in was just in regards to the content of today's presentation. The session's being recorded. We will make it available via follow-up email to everyone. And of course, if you have any follow-up questions for us, please feel free to respond to that email when you receive it. And feel free to distribute this presentation with your colleagues if you think any of the information is useful. But most of all, thank you for sticking with us today. We went a little longer than we expected, but we had a lot of ground to cover, and hopefully everybody walks away with some useful tidbits. So thank you very much for joining us, and have a great day.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks for hosting, Trevor.